People often ask me why I think the craft beer game started or the business started, and I think it really started in people's homes. World War II, when service guys were over in the UK and they had some fuller flavored beers, and some of those guys came back and started home brewing. It evolved from there into the 60s and 70s. So the home brewing industry kind of really made that happen. But everybody remember Jimmy Carter. Billy Carter wanted to brew beer and wanted to have his own beer, and that's when Jimmy Carter changed the law to change the three-tier systems that made it legal to have brew pubs set up. Going back to Jimmy Carter, thank you, Jimmy. That was the one thing Billy really made happen. Billy was quite a character too. He was truly a beer guy. If you're close to my age, you were in high school at the time hearing these stories about Billy, but we got to thank him for sure. And it was Jimmy that did it, and then it evolved, and you had Fritz Maytag on the West Coast rebuilding Anchor Steam, and then you had Alan Pugsley and David Gary and the Gary family. I think Gary's was the first brewery east of the Mississippi back in the 80s. I think it was 86. So a lot of people wanted fuller flavor in a lot of the things like bread and coffee, and it was part of that craze as well. When I was in high school, I was drinking Schaefer and Schlitz, and my first beer was Tuborg that my Uncle Fred, that I was named after, Fred Brehe, had a distributorship. Tuborg was a full flavored beer, so I had been a little bit exposed to it, but I drank mostly mainstream beers, and then Heineken got big when I was in college, so I was not a craft beer guy. I think the first craft beer that I had other than McGuire's was Gritty McDuff's. I would never have had the idea to do a craft beer if I hadn't had my brother Richard take me to McGuire's and have that experience of tasting a beer for the first time that was a craft beer. And we were in a recession in the late 80s, and real estate had been really depressed, and I don't want to say I was broke. I was more than broke. I owed more money on real estate than it was worth. I probably would have never done it unless it was done out of desperation. I had this funny experience when Bank of America about 12 years ago or so, beer was starting to take off, and I was on a panel with 3 other brewers, and every one of the brewers started by saying, well, I was a lawyer and I didn't really want to be a lawyer, so I started a brewery. I was the third person to speak, and I said, well, I could get into law school, so I started a brewery. Now, that was really, trying to make something happen in real estate, and that was an idea, and then kind of raised the money, and then out of the fact that they walked away and didn't want to run it, that I ended up doing it. So it was out of necessity. What do they say? Necessity is mother of invention. There's no question it was in this circumstance. We opened June 15th, and then by September, a lot of the tourists leave Kennebunk Port Harbor, and all of a sudden I had a brewer and a space and minimal business. So I said, boy, I got to figure out something to do. I basically filled up kegs, came up to Portland, and selling to some of my first accounts. You could self-distribute in those days, and I basically got, before I knew it, I had 12 accounts, and I had enough to keep a 7-barrel brewery, because you brew 14 kegs at a time, busy. And so it was out of desperation, again, to keep paying for my brewer, trying to figure out how to make money through the winter, that I started the outside sales. Because initially, we designed a brewery that was good for a restaurant, not thinking we had a situation where Kennebunkport got really slow. Now Kennebunkport's pretty busy until January, and then January, February pretty slow. But it was out of desperation, again, that I got in my S10 Blazer and started to deliver beer. And that's when I got lucky enough to have Alan Pugsley to come on board to be my partner. Then all of a sudden the beer took off, and we were brewing 3 times a day. And that's when we needed to find a new brewery. And we found the building and the 4-acre space in Portland that was an abandoned warehouse. That's when we went to a 50-barrel system. What was interesting is, just given Alan's ability to brew world-class beer and train brewers, my ability to sell, we became the fastest growing craft beer company, or one of the fastest, in 1995, 96, going into 97. The biggest challenge was capital. We were making money on paper, but we didn't have enough capital to keep growing because of inventory, receivables, all the things that happen to a business. I had to figure out how to find more capital, and I looked at ways going public or bringing in investors, and long story short, we ultimately partnered with one of the largest breweries and largest companies in the world, which was Philip Morris owned Miller Brewing, Miller Brewing started a division called American Specialty Craft Beer. We teamed up with Celis Brewery and Leinenkugel to grow together with funding from Miller Brewing. So we learned a lot from the big company, and they learned a lot from us. At the time, Miller didn't even understand websites, and we had Shipyard.com. They actually didn't even have internal email or email at all within Miller Brewing. Then all of a sudden they come in, and what I didn't realize at the time was big companies a lot of times buy smaller companies to find out what they're doing to grow, and almost an experiment. So at the end when we got lucky enough to buy the brewery back from Miller and American Specialty Craft Beer, some of the guys who were involved, which I'm still friends with and developed a relationship with, they would explain that, hey, we learned a lot from you and the company. All of a sudden they got creative on their wearables. Actually, some of our vendor deals were even better. Hard to believe, but true. So that was an experience. I did learn a lot from some of the bigger companies, but I also learned why communication was so critical, because you saw where some of the holes were in some of the bigger companies too. So we got fortunate enough, a guy named Cardella actually came into town and said, listen, you shut your mouth and listen to me and you might be able to buy their half of the brewery back. And I saw a lot of breweries come and go over the years, and we've been fortunate to sustain and build, and my goal is to have our brewery live on for generations and long into the future. And with our success globally, I think we'll be able to do that.